Does anybody see that it's starting to record yet? Okay.
Yes.
So this is the Sangha UK Skype group, and that I welcome everybody here. It's Sunday afternoon here at a little after 4 o'clock, and it's in Europe, in the UK, it's late morning. So we've got quite a crowd today, and we're going to be talking about body parts and also the hindrances. So, Cat's at the Wat. We still don't know how to say it. The monks told him several times, but he doesn't know how to hear Thai language yet. And so he ask him to slow down and give you each syllable, and you can repeat it. He'll laugh at you, but keep trying it, and pretty soon you'll be able to say the name of the Wat. I'll also give it to Tam, that image that you sent, and see if she could figure it out. So it's a very interesting Wat, by the way, that Kath is in. It's a kind of a Wat with no name. It's not really a Wat in the sense of the formal. It's more of like a mission rather than a church. And that the distinction is that this Wat does not have a sema, so there cannot be any ordinations. The Wat is not blessed. It's just kind of a hole in the wall out in the woods with some great big rocks and a lot of water and jungle, which is really great. And also the monks there don't have much of a schedule. There's not very many there. And there's also some empty kutis. And in a way, it's almost opposite of what you were used to before, where you spent 4 months at Wat Rusi Pasiangtang, which Achan Maitri there really loves to teach. And he does ceremonies and all of that kind of stuff, group talks together and that kind of thing. So he's really a teaching monk. And that both kinds of Wats have their value, but both of them have a lot of time for seclusion. Not much is happening. But the one thing that's really great is that, in fact, one thing that you told me this week, Kat, is that you had a monk to come to visit who happened to have been the abbot of Wat Khao Tam here on the island, and that's the Wat that you tried to get into. Daniel, we've got places for you now. You don't have to stay up in the northeast or the northwest. We've got a place for you to come hang out here, or 2 places, or maybe 3. So you
it's
left
very
early.
Nice and cold here, so I'm really loving it here. So I think I'll stay here for the moment.
All right. Well,
it's good to have a place anyway.
Yeah, moments are long or short depending upon your attitude. So, while Catherine was there at the Wat, the monk mentioned about the 32 parts of the body as a reflection or a meditation, thinking about the parts of the body, that in fact, in the suttas, it describes the body as like a bag of seed, like rice seed and corn husk and that kind of stuff, referring to the kidneys and all of the various parts of the body that we normally don't have any sensations for. And that part of the idea, I think, of with that, at least in my old days of reflecting upon it, is that it has the connotation of the body is not much to it. That in fact, in a way, is kind of disgusting. That in fact, one of the things that we would kind of like is to do without the body. I mean, a free-floating spirit. Just wander around wherever you don't have to pack bags or have airplanes to ride in or anywhere. You can just think of where you want to go and off you go. But reality is different than that. And yet in our society, we are taught to value the body, and we do so in kind of an unwholesome way. We identify with the body, but when we really start investigating the body, we can see that, well, really, it's a tool, but there's nothing exciting about it to get attached to, because we really can't control the body much. That, in fact, in the example that they give in the sutta, they talk about internal organs, kidneys, livers, that kind of stuff. And we can't really contemplate that unless there is a sensation there which we almost always would associate with pain, that it's painful. And a kind of a better way, I think, to actually work with it is the way that Goenka teaches, and that is to experience the body by scanning systematically. The Goenka method is that you start at the top of the head and then you move around and you feel the sensations of the face and all of that kind of stuff, and then you move down to the shoulders and to the body and down to the feet or the toes. And then sometimes you work yourself backwards, and sometimes you start over from the top of the head and going down. But I think that that's also a little bit artificial. It has some value, but in the sutta that we were talking about, the Majjhima Nikaya number 10, where these body parts, it actually talks about the usability of the body. So look at the way that the hands move when you're grasping and reaching and holding something or setting it down. Notice how you use your hands in association with your face. Now, some cultures, they actually teach the kids, don't touch your face. And in some cultures, it's really important, just like they teach the girls to keep their knees together. I don't know why, but they're taught that like there's something valuable there that they have to protect. And that the real experience that we're talking about is to be mindful of what the body is doing. When you're making gestures, notice that you're making gestures. Wherever the hands are, kind of pay attention to what they're doing. If you're scratching, know you're scratching. If you're rubbing your arms, notice that you're rubbing your arms. Keep track of the reality that you're putting yourself through right there in the moment. To come to the present moment, to be here now. That the body actually isn't all of that repulsive, but it is good to recognize that it is not all sweetness and light. That in fact, I would say that offhand, part of it has to do with conquering our desires for sensuality or even sexuality, is to recognize that the body is just these parts. You have ovaries and you have testicles and you have this thing and that thing and whatnot, but it's just a thing. That it's not all of that delightful, and yet we are taught to take great delight in those things. It's almost like if a kid is forbidden to drink beer, he'll go drink beer. If the kid is forbidden to do drugs, he'll go do drugs. And with our Christian, mostly Catholic background, we are forbidden to play with certain body parts, and so we go play with them. That's just natural way that kids do it. So as we're practicing, we can recognize that there's really not all that much to it, that it was forbidden in order to keep us away from it, but investigating the darn thing would be a whole lot better if we would really see that it's just body parts. There's just not much there. And so that's basically what I would have to say is that when you're contemplating the body, contemplate its movement, contemplate the posture, that the Mahasi's little phrase of rising, falling, touching, sitting is a very, very good way to do it. To notice the rising of the breath on the in breath, the falling of the chest, and the changes of the body on an out breath. Notice that when you're sitting, you're touching a lot of stuff. You can feel the floor with your feet. You can feel the chair. You can feel the armrest. You can feel the chair touching the body. And so being aware of that, and if there's any body movement, then that's also something to look at. One of the ways of actually thinking about it is that when you get up out of a chair, why do you get up out of the chair? I mean, you're sitting comfortably in the chair. Why do we get up and go someplace? What's the movements? What's the behaviors around to that? And so watching the body move, watching your hands, watching your face, notice what gestures you have. Especially notice that if you're furrowing your brow, or if you're raising your eyebrows, or if you're communicating with your face, remember to notice that. To be in the here now with what the body is doing. So, Amrit, you got a question?
Yeah, I mean, one thing you mentioned Goenka body scan method, and but I think at one of the talk I heard you say that this Goenka body scan method is a part of Anapanasati.
Yes. Step 3, precisely.
Mm.
He just kind of overdoes it.
Yes, I think, but in his method, he also he said, okay, there is an Anapanasati where you are only focusing on the breath at the nostril, so that Anapanasati, and then what his method body scan is a Vipassana. So he separate these two out, but they are in a sense.
Actually, I'm pretty sure that Goenka does not talk about the nose.
He said you focus your breath on the upper lip first, and that's what he mentioned as Anapanasati. But this is the first two days.
But in fact, with the body scanning, staying on the nose is momentary. That then you move. Okay, from let us say the cheek to the nose to the other cheek, down to the lips and around, and notice all of what the body is doing while we're sitting. But what real anapanasati is to get in the habit of noticing what the body is doing every time that you remember to. That in fact, if you're going to take a deep breath, there's all kinds of sensations that you will have with that breath. One technique is called chasing the breath or following the breath. They're basically the same thing. Chasing after it or following after, and that's where you start at the nose tip as you're beginning to take an in-breath, and then take your mindfulness or your awareness back to the back of the throat, which is a good place to stay momentarily, and then down into the lungs to where you begin to lose sensation on the inside, and then you start paying attention to the outside of the body with the way that the breathing is. This is where Goenka talks about becoming aware of the touch of the cloth, of the rising of the belly, all the way up to the rising of the shoulders. Be aware of what the body is doing in that sense.
Yes.
And yet, go ahead.
Yes, and also in Thanisaro Bhikkhu method, so he also has an Anapanasati meditation, guided meditation. And he talks about being aware of the full body when you're breathing. Also, he said, and I also feel it, right? If you're breathing, you can feel the energy moving also up to your toe or your fingers.
Yes. The hands are actually one of the more important things to spend more time on, and yet in the body scanning of the Goenka method, they only point to the hands momentarily. Down to the hands, and then they'll move on, as opposed to really getting into the hands. Notice each finger. Notice the relationship between the fingers. Notice the touch, that you can in fact take your hand and rub it across like this and get really, really nice feeling of sensation, especially rubbing the palm of your hand. Everybody do that for a second. Just take one hand and rub the palm of the hand with your other hand and notice the feelings and the sensation of the palm of the hand, but also notice the touch and the sensations of the hand that's doing the rubbing. So I've got this one that's rubbing with the tips of the fingers, and this one I'm rubbing with the palm of the hand. And this sensation is actually quite delightful. That in fact, in practice, a lot of old, let us say, Buddha rupas or icons or statues, if you want to use the word, have various hand movements in there. Some of them actually have labels, and they're known as mudra. How many of you have heard the word mudras before?
Yep.
Right, okay, we've heard of that word. And what does it mean? Well, the word mu is the word for hand, da. That's an interesting point. So the mudras are actually watching the hands, watching the states of the hand in various things like this. And it's good to spend quite a lot of time with that. Notice what the hands are doing, that if you're picking your nose, notice that. If you are holding your face, notice that. Notice what the face is doing, whether you're propping yourself up or whatever it is. And this is especially good when you're laying in bed at night about to go to sleep, or maybe you're just being entertained by your cell phone or something. But notice what postures that you're in. Because one thing is that when you're noticing the postures and what the body is doing, you're actually in the present moment, because you're not watching what the body did last year or next week. We don't do that. That in fact, as many times as I have done the Anapanasati and the experiencing the body, I don't remember in the past exactly a particular time of doing any particular thing. It's always done right here, right now. And so doing it that way keeps us actually in the present moment. Now, some of these hand movements are well known. How many of you have seen this one? All right. Notice that the fingers are not actually quite touching, and yet they can feel each other without the sensation of the actual touch. There's an energy field that you can experience between them. You can also do that with the hands. In fact, the Sawati cup or the Namaste is not when you put the hands together, like in prayer, but that you hold them very, very closely together. How closely can you hold the hands together without them actually touching? And when it does touch, notice that it's touching. And where does it touch? So touching the hands and experiencing the hands. I mean, the hands are really friends, and there is so much sensation there. There are more neurons on our fingers than there are in almost every other part of the body, including even the eyes. And so a lot of people learn to see with their hands. An example would be an automobile mechanic, some martial arts, some surgeons. The surgeons feel their way around. They can't stick their head up your butt, but they can certainly stick a finger up there, and they know exactly what to feel for and look for, so their finger becomes kind of an eye. And so we can actually train the hands to get more sensations because we're paying attention to the hands. That in fact, if we're paying attention to the hands, we do that in the moment. That's a real skill development, because most people are really out of touch with their hands. So there's a lot of different mudras. There's another one where you lay your palm of your hand over your right knee with your right hand so that the fingers drip down, almost touching the floor. so that if you get one of those kinds of experiences, like you're feeling like you're 30 feet or 60 feet tall, or that you're flying through the air, you don't have to open your eyes to get grounded. You just touch that middle finger to the earth, to the floor. That in fact, this is what that mudra is known for, is touch the earth, to help you get re-grounded, so that you're not flying off into outer space. Also, there's one to where you hold the hand out, either completely straight or slightly bent. But the important point is that you put your focus on the palm of your hand. And the way to get that alive is by rubbing the palm of your hand. In fact, when you guys were rubbing your hand, did you feel that it was actually quite sensational? Quite a big touch in there. So if you put all of your mind on that hand, this is actually called the healing mudra, that you can put your hand out. Have you ever heard that in some religions they call it healing by putting your hand, laying upon the hands? That's what they call it. Have you ever heard of laying upon the hands?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, Gary knows. He was Catholic, so he knows what I'm talking about. All right.
Well, they don't do that. No, it's your lot. It's your Southern Baptists and that do that sort of thing. The Catholic Church wouldn't have a bar of that. They'd call it dealing with the devil or something like that.
Maybe it's just too real. It's not magical. But the fact is that you can send a lot of healing energy this way. Not magic, but real, let us say, giving someone a blessing by putting your hands out and holding your energy in there with the idea of maybe transmitting energy. You sure the Catholics don't do that? I've been to a different Catholic church than you were at. Maybe it was an American Catholic.
I mean, it's a long time since I've been anywhere near them, so I'm probably talking stuff that happened, that they hadn't developed years ago. But I mean, to me,
this is old stuff. Maybe they forgot about doing it.
But to me, this idea of sending energy by the hand and so on is the purest magical thinking.
Exactly right.
You cannot do it. You cannot. I can send you all the good vibes or whatever with my hand that I want to, but it's not going to do anything to you. I don't believe it's going to do stuff to me, but it's not going to do.
That may be debatable, but the important thing is, what does it do for you?
Precisely. But I mean, okay, you get some instrument and detect the energy, fine. But I'm sorry, I am very much materialistic about these things.
Me too. I'm quite a scientist, and I would say that that's very hard to measure, but it can be experienced without measured.
I'm sure it can be experienced, but then you get into the question of what does your experience mean?
Well,
is it something real, or is it just another sensation?
Well, let's do a little poll. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I use the word cuddling? When you touch someone, all right? When you experience them, that the touch. Why do you call it petting a dog, and why do dogs love to be touched? This is what we're talking about, and it doesn't have to have just the magical quality to it. It has more to do with the reaching out and touching someone without actually touching them. That this is what this part is about, in learning to see how close can you get the fingers together without them actually touching, the thumb and the index finger, to how close can you get them so that they begin to experience the other. This is a way of developing those kind of things. So you can move your hand in and out like this and begin to feel it. The other one would be this, of holding the hands together and let the hands experience each other. The warmth or the communication between them, We don't have to get magical. I'm not into magic, just like you are, Gary. I'm not a magical kind of guy, but I do know that part of the practice of Anapanasati is to get really familiar with the body.
Mhm.
And we can go on from this now to say, well, what are our options for doing this? The options would be off in the brain someplace, going someplace else, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, being excited, being in doubt, being restless, wanting something. In fact, I'm going right through the hindrances now, because dealing with the body is a good option for keeping the mind in the present moment and being real, as opposed to the real magical thinking is the magic of thinking about the past, thinking about someplace else, thinking about New York City. Is anybody here from New York? Nope. All right. So I just mentioned the word, and all of a sudden people start seeing images of skyscrapers. And other people will see images of getting robbed. It depends upon what your view of New York is. So if we can stay away from those things and stay in the present moment, then that's the freedom from the hindrances. Now, Agnes mentioned something. I've got a metaphor about it, that when the hindrances come up, they can actually bowl us over. An example of that was that we talked about the dog dying. If I sit here and think about the dog, I'll start getting let us say, remorseful. Oh, maybe I could have done something. I could have taken her to the vet, and I have all of these thoughts about that. And the fact is that she's dead now. Let her rest. Let her rest in peace, and let me rest in peace also. I don't have to go take my mind to that place. Or I don't have to think of some place to go and something to do, which would be restlessness and worry, or having an unsolved problem. That we could just let things go and let things be, and let's stay in the present moment. So think of the hindrances as like a big truck bearing down upon you, about to hit you. Now, the way that this practice with meditation is that in the method that they talk about is actually quite Western. I would not pin this on Mahasi Sayadaw, the actual monk, whose namesake is used there, but the actual practice of the Mahasi method that is quite well known in the West. How many of you have ever heard of or experienced the what they call the Mahasi method? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, all right. So you guys know what I'm talking about. This is like confronting those hindrances. And you get them, and you see them, and you look them up, and you compare them, and you get all kinds of frustrated about all of these hindrances, and that's like getting run over by that truck. And then there is another method, this I think is referred to in Vajrayana, where they call it choiceless awareness. That you just let those hindrances just roll right on by without doing much of anything about it. I'm becoming choiceless about how bad I feel. So that's not the practice of Anapanasati, nor is it the practice of the Buddha. What the Buddha recommends is see that truck bearing down upon us and get out of its way. Move aside. Change a little bit. Don't get stuck into those hindrances and let them either run you over while you're resisting them and contemplating them, or run you over because you're not watching. Those are the two kinds of meditations. And the third is the actual teaching of the Buddha, is get rid of them. Get out of the way. Step aside. Get out of the road is another way of talking about it. Now, these hindrances are lumped together as hindrances. There's 5 of them, but that 5 is only the way that we would chop them up. And in fact, they're all deeply related. So A way that you can see that they're related is that if I'm worried about something, isn't that doubt? Am I not asking questions and trying to figure out what's going on? And aren't we, in fact, in a state of restlessness because we want something? If you think of it like that, the hindrances are just various ways of looking at all of the problems of the world, all the stuff that can keep us distracted from the reality of the moment. And so those hindrances are listed as 5, and that in Sutta number 39 in the Majjhima Nikaya, there is a reference to these 5 hindrances in the sense of what is the option to them. And one of the options that they talk about is like being sick, maybe in the hospital, being bedbound, and we don't like it and we feel bad, but as soon as we feel better, we want to get out of the hospital. We want to get out of bed. We're tired of it. And so when we feel better, we want out. So the hindrances is like getting over being sick. And we can do that even if the body is still sick. We can get out of the sickness and put the mind back in a good state. Another example is being in prison, that in fact we are imprisoned by our thoughts. We get stuck in a rut. We have particular ways of doing things and viewing things, and that we don't have much freedom at all. And so one of the ways that we can see being free from the hindrances is like getting a get out of hell free card, getting out of jail free. I'm free now. I don't have to be confined within the space of the mind that is part of the worry, the frustrations, the wanting stuff, the being dissatisfied, the wanting to change things, worry, remorse, doubt. And so another example of these would be being in debt. How many of you are in debt now that you owe? You have credit card bills, you've got a mortgage, you've got a car payment, you've got to pay for things. Doesn't it feel really great to be completely free from debt? You don't owe anybody anything. There are no payments to make. There's nothing to do. In fact, the only thing that I know of that we have here is the rent, and Tam pays that, and we also have the internet bill, and she pays that. But that's basically the only 2 bills that we have, and they're always current. So I can say that I don't have any debts at all. Kat, are you like that? Right now, you don't owe anybody anything. I see you smile, too. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that magnificent to be free from debt? How about you, Gary? Are you free from debt? You don't owe anybody anything.
In monetary terms, yes. But I mean, you're always owing something to somebody. For instance, I mean, you owe a certain duties to your family that you have to keep in touch with them. You have to you have to make sure that basically make sure that they're all right too.
But I can see that in the moment. Here they are. I don't have to worry about them like people worry about paying a bill or paying a debt. And I would say that when a family member is in the hospital, we can go to the hospital to visit them, but we don't have to leave the hospital with the body and go someplace else and leave the mind in that hospital room. We can stay in the present moment so that we don't have to worry and fret about the welfare of someone. If they're in the hospital, let the hospital staff do their job. Just
yes,
like
I'm thinking more in the sense that you take on a kind of duty to people by being related to them or by being friends with them, even it is only to stay in touch with them. So you feel that, I haven't spoken to my friend Willie for 3 months. I'd better get in touch with him. And that is a kind of sense of debt.
Right. And it's uncomfortable when you say, oh, I haven't talked to Willie in so long. Oh, I wish he would call. In fact, I have that with students.
Yeah.
And I say, never mind. They'll call when they're ready. I don't have to be in touch with them. Everything is okay. Because you're talking about actually an emotional debt.
Mm-hmm.
And owing that obligation. Wouldn't you rather be absolutely free from that debt? I mean, Kat, you're staying at the Watt now. You don't have a lot of obligations much to anybody. So, Daniel, what you got?
I was reading the suttas, and in there, the Buddha mentions that at some point, a bhikkhu leaves behind a small or large circle of relatives. Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Oh, you mean a small or large fortune?
I also saw a small or large circle of relatives.
Right. That's your obligations. Can you actually set down those obligations? Remember, I was talking about Howard Hughes, that even though he lived in seclusion and stayed at the in the penthouse of one of the big hotels he owned, he was not actually in seclusion because he had several, probably dozens of businesses to run, and he constantly was thinking about them. He never went to that airplane factory, but he went to that airplane factory every day in his mind. He had to. Right? Who else is going to run it? The answer is that he died and the company was quite well off without him.
You've got something on your camera, by the way. The vision is really blurry right now. Oh yeah, that's better.
Yeah. Kat, can you turn this light off right here?
That makes sense.
Yeah, I've got a halo. There I go. Now I'm back to being human again. Thank you. So, this is the whole quality of being in debt, like you've got something on your mind that you've got to go do. It can be money, it can be running a business, it can be keeping up with your friends, it can be any of that kind of stuff, and it's worrisome. It's a hindrance in the sense that it's hindering us from being in a really good state right now. And that we can be free from the hindrances. So another example is in fact, in the suttas, they have the example of that the servant or the attendant has to get up in the morning before the king gets up. He has to dress himself, and then he goes and gets the king up and has to dress the king. Then he waits on the king, what they call hand and foot, all day. And then when the king goes to bed at night, he helps the king take his clothes off, and then the king goes to sleep, and now he can go to his room and take his clothes off and go to sleep. He's got an obligation all day long. And many of us see that kind of obligation in the sense of holding a job, that we're convinced that we've got to work. And Daniel and Kat are two of them here that have found ways to not have to work. I think Jerry is getting old enough now that he's kind of figured out he doesn't have to work either. You don't have to have these obligations. You can let old friends contact you. You don't have to contact them. If they want you, let them do that work.
Trouble is, of course, that is how friendships end, because everybody says, oh, well, I'll let him contact me. Nobody contacts anybody. And then, something valuable is lost.
But something unvaluable is also lost. And that is the need to have friends. Because we can let them go. You're feeling good already about yourself. And so you don't have to contact them. However, if on the spur of the moment you think of Bob and you say, okay, I'll give Bob a call.
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have to worry and fret about Bob because he hasn't called me.
Well,
That's a hindrance. That's a debt. Just like we're thinking, oh, I've got to go make the mortgage payment. Now you got to go give Bob a call. Now, I'm not saying that you have to lose your friendships, but what I'm saying is that we don't have to rely upon them as if they were a burden or a debt or something as a responsibility. But if Bob comes to mind, don't fret about him. Call him.
yes, that is interesting because, in fact, an awful lot of what one does in life is done out of a sense of obligation because you were taught way back when that that you should be calling Bob occasionally.
Oh, you should. There's a rule in
And
there.
precisely, and you're not operating from a sense of what you want to do. You're a sense of operating from what you were told, probably in childhood, that you ought to want to do.
Right. Okay. How many of you have that experience that Jerry's talking about? That you have to go do stuff. You have to go contact the friends. That you're obligated to do that because you were taught that. And that's just merely a rule. The better way of thinking of it is that I am free to make choices about it. I don't have to listen to the old rules that I piled on. I don't have a sense of obligation. That when I have a sense of obligation, that's the hindrance. And when I'm having that sense of obligation, I'm not free to sit and just say, wow, what a relief it is. I don't have to think about any of those people. Instead of, oh, I've got to call Bob. Oh, I've got to call Granny. Oh, I've got to go do this and that. And here, if I had that with my students, how many students would I fret over all day long because they don't call? I mean, you guys don't call me that often. I'm in misery when you don't call.
I don't think so.
All right. So the last one of those, we've covered 4 of them so far. Let's do a kind of a review. The first one we talked about was about getting sick and getting out of the hospital, being in prison, getting free. Then we talked about having a job and being in debt. In fact, those 4 things work very close together in the sense of, why do you have a job? Well, you've got debts to pay. Well, why do I have debts? It's because I bought stuff that I wanted. And so round and round the circle of those hindrances go. And the last one is being on a trip, being on a journey, having all your goods. In fact, the example that I remember having was that it was a camel train. And I've got all of these camels that I've got to maneuver through the desert, keep them healthy. Also, I've got to make sure that the thieves don't come and rob. I mean, Mohammed, the one that we have to say, a peace be unto you, he was out there stealing camels and all the goods. And so we have to be careful when we're out on a journey. I mean, there's I've seen internet things to where somebody sets their bag down at the airport and somebody else comes on while they're not looking and puts his bag right on top of theirs, except his bag has a bottom that's false. And so it slips right over the top and then grabs his bag. So when he picks up his bag, he picks up yours too. And if you're not mindful, off it goes. This is what happens when we're traveling. And so everybody in a journey is kind of like clutching their bags. You got to watch them. In fact, one of the reasons why people want to travel together is somebody's like the designated driver, except they're the designated bag watcher. And somebody's got to watch those bags. But when you get home, you can set those suitcases down. In fact, when you've been on a journey, the first thing that you do is you sit down and relax, and you don't even bother to unpack the bags. Right? How many people get home from a journey, the first thing they do is unpack? Not the first thing. No, the first thing is that they relax, maybe even fall on the bed. Well, glad to be home. So we're talking about here that being free from the hindrances is very much like being glad that you finally arrived. You're home now. You've finished with that journey. And yet, here we go with the hindrances in the mind going all over the place. I mean, I mentioned New York, and about half of you are probably still thinking about New York just because I mentioned it. All journeying around instead of coming back to this present moment right here, right now. We're at home. We can relax. Wow, what a relief it is to be completely free from these hindrances. And so at one time, to be honest with you, I tried to take these 5 examples of sick, prison, job to do, doubt about owing money, and out traveling. I tried to label each one of those to a specific hindrance, and yet those 5 analogies work for all of the hindrances. There's no reason to divide just because 5 and 5 doesn't mean anything. There's not a one-to-one correspondence. And in fact, like I've talked about the 5 hindrances being like a pizza pie. It doesn't matter which way you cut the pie. There's no such thing as a north, south, and east to west of a pizza. But when you cut it up, you cut it into pieces, but it was still part of that pie. So think of the hindrances in all 5 of them as like a pizza pie. They all merge together. It's hard to get a piece of pie off without taking the cheese off of another piece. And the hindrances are the same way. The hindrances are exactly like that, that when you pull on one hindrance, at least 2 other hindrances come right along with it. And that I would say that the number one issue that most people have, Amit, you were asking about this, and that is that we get something on the mind and we won't let it go. We call that worry, fretting, thinking about something to do. And then we have to, like a problem, we have to solve it. And so we start asking ourselves questions and figuring stuff out. And start thinking, oh, I know this and oh, I know that. And these are all the hindrances that, in fact, if we have something real to do, let's just wait until we can actually do it without having to figure it out. And yet we spend much of our hours awake or even sometimes when we're asleep. We're trying to figure something out. We're trying to get it right. We're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to do, Jerry, what we were told to do. Instead of just being without any of the rules, without being any of the worries, just sitting and enjoying the present moment. To come out of those hindrances, because the hindrances actually are called hindrances because they hinder us from being in a state of delight. To be delightful. And it's hard to be delightful when you're off journeying. I mean, if you want to see a whole bunch of miserable people all crowded together, go look at an airport or a train station. Wow, what a bunch of miserable people, all of them clutching their bags, and they hate to take their shoes off in America, and all kinds of stuff is going on. I don't even understand how the airlines can stay in business. If people were really satisfied with their lives, they wouldn't be out traveling. They wouldn't be out going to see Uncle Bob. There's no reason to go and go and go and go. But in fact, the reason that we do it physically is because we've got it on the mind. We're actually already traveling before we buy the ticket. So can we, in fact, spend more and more time not traveling in the mind? That we're already at home. That's something that I would say that you can develop. Kat, I got to ask you this question now. Do you now feel at home at the what that you're in?
Yeah, definitely.
And how does that feel to be at home, to be where you want and need to be?
Just have a sense of just being here. I don't know. You're just kind of there, and that's it. Like there's not much to it, you know.
Right, there's not much to it when you're at home, but when you're out traveling, boy, is there a lot to it.
Oh, I've got a question about this. It's very
Yes.
relevant for me at the moment.
Uh-huh.
So the what I'm at, the English-speaking monk, which there's only one of, was leaving to another place, and he wanted me to join because he was the only one that could talk to me. But then, they brought me to the place, and all the monks came along, and he was going to stay there for sure. And then, the place was so uncomfortable. I was like, well, I've got everything I need at the other place, so why don't I just stay there? But they really tried to pressure me to go to the other place. They said, yeah, it's good to be uncomfortable because then you get used to like new. Yeah, you can make your mind comfortable there as well. So I was wondering, do you think it's a good thing to put yourself in uncomfortable what on purpose? I felt
Yes.
like this.
Now, in Thailand, as well as in the time of the Buddha, the monks would move around a lot, but they would stay for the rains retreat because it wasn't good to go mess up somebody's rice paddy or step in the mud and get covered with mud and all of that kind of stuff. And so for a while, about 3 months of the year, they'd pretty well stay put. But the question is when they're out traveling, can they be at home while they're actually traveling? I mean, the monks are really lucky because all they will carry is a robe and a bowl, maybe a few tidbits. But basically, it's just really interesting, really old-fashioned camping gear. And so can you actually go out walking without having the feeling of I've got to carry all of my valuable stuff and it's being dangerous out there? Can you be in comfort? Can you be at home while you're out and about? Well, we need to practice that. We need to actually stay at home long enough to feel like that we're at home.
Isn't it good to be comfortable in a comfortable place first, and then gradually like try new things instead of like trying to train it?
That's exactly what we talk about as anapanasati. That in fact, when we were little kids, we were out there going before we were ever really at home. And a lot of people will say that when I was a kid, I didn't feel at home. I didn't feel like that I was where I belonged. I felt like that I was in a place where I was told what to do often, sometimes getting spanked. And so we need to settle down and to practice getting the sense of that you have arrived, that there's no place to go, there's no journeys left, that we could just be home and be comfortable within our own being. And then after we gain that feeling of comfort, we can, in fact, go out if that's what the situation calls for. We also talk about exactly that same thing when we talk about friendship, that we need to learn to be friends with ourselves, to be home with ourselves. And when we can be friendly with ourselves, nurturing to ourselves, accept ourselves as we are, warts and all, you don't have to fix it so that your sila is perfect until you feel good. No, you can feel good about yourself right now. And when you do feel good about yourself right now because of your practice, you can take that good feeling of being at home, being comfortable, being nurturing to yourself, and we can take that out on the road.
The monk the what like literally doesn't sleep in a kuti. He just sleeps in the sala. Sometimes he sleeps on the rock, and he's the head monk of the what. You know, he doesn't sleep in a kuti. Yeah, he sleeps on the rock in his robes. Like he just brings a little pillow, and he was showing me like lots of videos of him going on like week-long walks somewhere. Like, you know, he just likes to pick up a little alms bag and just go on long walks for like weeks and come back. It's just interesting to see that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, yeah.
And the whole point is that he's comfortable in that moment. He's trained himself. He's well trained that even though his feet are going pitter-patter across the town, he's at home. That feeling of it being at home and being at peace with yourself is being free from the hindrances. And the hindrances is about wanting something, wanting to get rid of something, not paying close attention to what's going on, worry, frustrations, doubts, all of those things prevent us from feeling like that we've arrived, that we're at home now. And so these are the hindrances that actually hinder us from being at home, being okay. So we need to practice being okay because we grew up feeling not okay. I don't think anybody here would say, oh, well, I felt okay my whole life. I never, you know, very few. That's very, very rare. Most of us are raised in a society where the child feels like, I've got to go do something before I can rest, rather than learning to rest because we got nothing to do. That when an adult sees a kid playing, they want the kid to stop playing and start doing something useful, productive. Why? Because admit you owe somebody something. You owe them. You're in debt. And so being free from physical debt, being out of debt and not owing any money to anyone is actually a good training to feel. I mean, how many people how many of you here, in fact, have been in debt and then paid it off? How do you feel after you paid it off? That you don't
Very
owe
good.
any money. Rick, how about you? Have you ever been in that state to where you owed money, owed a mortgage? You couldn't wait to get it paid off.
I guess, yeah, but not like, no, I didn't experience that feeling of like, oh, I can't pay it off. It's been okay, basically. It's like a strategic debt, you know?
It's like what?
Strategic debt. So it's not like debt that's like pressing.
Uh-huh. Well, most of the people that I know in the United States are in a kind of debt that's pressing. They don't like the interest rate. It's too expensive. Not only that, but half the stuff that they still have to pay for is busted already. Women will go into debt over a wardrobe, and then they have to pay that wardrobe every month, but they don't even wear the clothing. So this is the physical reality of these 5 examples, is so that we can take them as metaphor and recognize that we do that on the inside. That we owe not money, but we owe people. We owe them time. We owe them, we've got to care for them. Rather than caring for somebody because you enjoy doing it, we care for people because we're obligated to pay for it, to take care of them. So this is the hindrances. And you can come out of those hindrances just because you can see them. Most people do not recognize that they're in the state of those hindrances, but when you wake up and take a look and see those hindrances there, you can say, aha, I don't have to feel like I'm on a journey. I can feel like I'm at home. Aha, I don't have to feel sick and tired. I can be okay. I can change my attitude. I don't have to feel like I'm worried. I don't have to solve any problems. And in fact, that's something that's quite common with meditators, is that when they hear about meditation, they want to get it right. They start asking a whole bunch of questions about meditation. And always the answer is, never mind, just relax. Start again, come back, and hang out. We don't have to have all of those questions about meditation answered. What we really need to do instead is to develop the skill of throwing all of those questions right out. You don't have to get it right. All you have to do is get it relaxed.
That's funny because when I have something that's really bothering me and I'm really investigating it, it just comes down to, yeah, I just shouldn't care and that it's okay.
Yeah, just don't care about it. Just throw it out. Let it go. You don't have to solve it. You'll do it later when you feel good.
Yesterday I had like a period of time where I felt like I was really free from the hindrances. And then I noticed that I do start to get the pity, but I only start to get the sukha, not necessarily, I think, because of like the positive thoughts, but because of the gladness with the Dhamma. So it's more like, oh, I can see this stuff works. That's what makes me happy, and not necessarily the thoughts themselves. So this was really interesting for me to see. I had not seen that before.
That's a good example of getting so far into meditation and then you want more. Or maybe occasionally you'll have a high point. You'll have some of that pity. You feel like you're on top of the world. And then tomorrow you come to sit in meditation. I want to feel like I'm on top of the world again. And now we're in hindrances because we want it. Rather than saying, oh, that was good yesterday. Let me sit here and enjoy myself now. Don't have to worry about what's going to happen next. Because if we're worried about attaining something in meditation, we'll never get anywhere. Because we're in the state of the hindrance of wanting something that we don't have. If there's one key to the entire practice of meditation, that one phrase is it. That we're not trying to get any attainment. In fact, we're doing just the opposite of that. We're being satisfied with what we've already got. What we've got right now is good enough. So, this has been a fun talk. Does anybody have any questions? Now that we've been talking about questions.
Do you have some, last week we had to talk about emptiness and like the hole inside. And so I started paying attention to that. And oftentimes I get the mind clear and then the only thing I have left is like that empty feeling. So I started trying to have gladdening thoughts with that. But sometimes I cannot really, I need some inspiration of some wholesome thoughts about emptiness. Like, oh, this is my basilica, for example. Or if you have some inspiration, that would be nice.
Yes, that's the whole point, that you've got it, is just to recognize that when you put stuff down, your hands are empty. When we stop having all of these hindrances, all of these worries, all of these things that we carry around in the mind, and just set them down, then we begin to get in touch with that feeling of being empty, meaningless. Nothing matters. We have been taught a lot. In fact, Christianity and the preachers get really, really up in the air about, we have to have a God, because if we don't have a God, there is no meaning to anything. And my answer to that is, wow. Nothing means anything. No worries, mate. There's no meaning to anything anymore, that everything is empty, including inside. There's just nothing much there to care about. We don't have to pick up something and shove it in that hole. We can just enjoy being holy. So continue with that. Just keep practicing, having fun with having nothing to do. No place to go, nothing to entertain, that in fact your hands are entertaining enough. Just watch how you feel. Experience that sensation. Notice the breeze in the air. Notice what the body is doing. And that's all we have to do, is to pay attention to get ourselves into the here now, where there's not much trouble. All of your trouble is in your past, and thinking about troubles, and thinking about all the worries, and thinking about stuff to do. And when you catch yourself doing that, you say, wow, let's be empty of all of that. Let's just have a great big cathedral inside, a basilica, a mansion, empty mansion, filled with nothing but me and God and a bit of air.
I have a question about that. I think when that comes up, what I see as emptiness, I might be confusing it with fear somehow, because it's like there's nothing there.
Well, guess what? The fear was already there. And what we're talking about here is when you get rid of the hindrances, where there's nothing left, now we can experience that fear that was already there. Mm-hmm. And now we can say, aha, I see you, fear, and I'm going to be empty of you too.
Okay, yeah. Because that's what
wow, what a relief it is to not be afraid.
Yeah. I've been facing that a lot, especially when I first started meditating, but sometimes it comes back, and it's quite overwhelming when it comes sometimes.
Catch it before it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah.
See it while it just whelms.
Mm-hmm. That truck again.
Yeah, just see it when it's there and recognize, oh, wow. And guess what? There's nothing to worry about. There's no fears.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, much of the worry and the fret that people have, all the problem solving they're doing, is because they're trying to make that feeling of fear go away. And so they feel afraid and says, well, I got to go do something. Maybe I got to go get the car prepared. Maybe I got to go to the bank. Maybe I've got to go pay my debt. Maybe I've got to go do this and the other. And then I'll feel like that I'm free from that fear.
Well, then it's I can escape it by doing that. I don't have to feel it while I'm doing other things or thinking about other things. It's like I'm pushing it down.
Right.
But really
we get ourselves distracted. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we can do when we're sitting alone, practicing Anapanasati, practicing throwing all of that stuff out, you're actually getting quite successful at throwing that stuff out, because all that's left now is that underlying fear that was my motivation, my drive. That was what driving me to be so busy my whole life. But now that I've thrown everything out, the only thing that's left is that what we call self-preservation instinct, and recognize really there's nothing to fear. There really is nothing to fear. It's all empty. And so what? If the boogeyman came and ate me right now, what a relief that would be. And so I don't have to worry about anything. Everything is already just okay. So we just start to develop that new habit of everything is all right. And when those fears come up, we can say, aha, I see that. Let me take a few deep breaths, have some happy thoughts. You'd be surprised at how quickly you can remove that sense of fear. How many of you have actually experienced this before? You know what I'm talking about. That sense of fear will come up, and we'll take a few deep breaths and say, you know, everything's going to be all right. There's nothing to worry about at all. And that fear will just melt away. And so we have to keep practicing that, because if we don't practice, that fear and that activity and those hindrances are going to come crying back. They'll come back screaming at us. Why? Because that's the culture that we live in. That's what the entire society is doing. And all of those vibes and vibrations about all of that stuff is right out there. And we pick up on that. Like
And once you
Obi-Wan.
have,
Seen that movie where Obi-Wan, wow, he feels so bad because that planet on the other side of the universe got blown up.
so
When
once
you
we,
say, oh, go
Yes,
ahead, please.
so
Henry,
once
go
we
ahead.
remove this, once we throw this fear out of the window, then hindrance automatically will either completely are out, or they would become they would visit less frequently, if I get correctly.
Both the kind of hindrances that we have and their intensity starts to melt away as we develop the skill of right effort. So in the beginning for meditators, that stuff is really hard to get rid of. Never mind, start again. Never mind, start again. Keep coming back, throwing that stuff out. You'll get down to the fear, and then you'll say, oh, never mind. Now, some people express it differently. They'll call it anxiety. I've had one student that calls it a panic attack. That when she's got nothing to do, she goes into panic mode. The answer is she was probably in panic mode most of the time. She just didn't know it because she was too frantic to try to get rid of it. And so she's out there doing all this stuff that's distracting. So that's actually a cue then, Agnes, that what we can do when we see that fear come up is we can still do the distracting. We can change the subject. We can get off over there someplace. Just like if we can get a dog that's really angry and barking at somebody come up, we can get them distracted. Give them something to eat. So we can distract ourselves from that fear.
But I've been actually, I used to do that a lot before. I did it all the time. But since I started meditating, it became really important for me to start staying in the moment, to not escape anymore. So that's what I've been doing for a long, long time. But it's and I've gotten rid of many of my fears, a lot of my fears, but sometimes it comes back, and I can feel like it's like the old days when I was living in that fear, and it's very scary when I feel it today, because there's such a big contrast, because I don't usually experience it today.
Well, great. Congratulations that you've removed so much of it. Keep going. So when that fear comes up, you can say, oh, I've dealt with this stuff before. I can do it again. I'm strong enough to handle a bit of fear, just long enough to pick it up and throw it out.
Yeah.
And we can distract ourselves then that way, instead of thinking, oh, I feel so bad. Oh, I'm afraid. Oh, I'm in anxiety. That in fact, it's a bodily sensation. And we don't like that feeling of fear. There is tension in the body, that the neck will swell, that we'll get rigid. And most of it is because there's some adrenaline, some chemicals in the body that have been kicked off. That in fact we could say, you've heard the story about Henry David Thoreau had the statement of people live lives of quiet desperation. What that means is that they've got a leaky adrenaline valve, and it just keeps dripping and dripping. There's nothing much to scream at. It's just a little bit there. But when we're sitting alone in meditation, when we've got nothing much else on the mind, we'll experience that. This is actually part of the Anapanasati experiencing the body. So we can experience that fear, and as we experience it, we can make the change so that we can actually relax the body. I'm so glad that I don't have to deal with that anxiety. And whenever I feel it, it's just a little bit there and easy to deal with. But many people will let it build and build and build until they're in a panic. They're full of anxiety. They're almost bouncing with energy because they've got too much adrenaline in the system. And the thing to do is to distract it. Turn that valve off. Let's do something else. Let's not have that on the mind. And then a minute or two later, we can come back and check. Oh, yeah, the anxiety is gone. Interesting. Interesting. It's not there anymore. Wow. So instead of hating the anxiety and wanting to get rid of it, that's going to keep the anxiety going. But if we can distract it from thinking about it, having wholesome thoughts like everything's going to be okay, no problems, no worries, I'll be all right, then that's kind of like cutting off that leaky valve, not having that faucet drip
Isn't
anymore.
that in the future? Like
Well,
when you say everything is going to be all right,
well,
instead of everything is all right now.
everything is all right. Everything's all right. Everything's going to be all right in this breath.
Oh, that's a good one. Gotta try that.
Yes, everything's going to be all right. Then, in fact, that line comes out of Jesus Christ Superstar. It's the song that Mary Magdalene is singing to Jesus the night before, or he's getting arrested. Everything's all right. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. I mean, even Jesus would worry himself half to death about getting crucified tomorrow if he would think about it. Just think of something else. Everything's all right. Still alive right now. There's also the story about the monk that was chased, and he was running away from a lion or a tiger or something like that, and he was climbing up the hill, and all of a sudden there's a precipice. But he didn't notice, and so he fell off. But on the way down, he caught a limb. And there he is hanging in midair, 200 feet below the rocks, and right above him is the tiger. And he knows that he can get up and get back if only the tiger will go away. But that tiger's not going to go away quickly. And so what he does is he just relaxes, hanging on to that limb, and he notices a flower that's growing on the side of the cliff. And he starts to paying attention to the flower. Oh, how beautiful this flower is. I can just experience that for a while. And pretty soon that old tiger goes away, and now he can climb back up. But most people are going to be frantic. And then, you know, they wear themselves out. They don't have any energy, and finally they let go. They can't hang on anymore. But when we're not thinking about the dangers above us and below us, we could just experience those beautiful flowers of the moment. Become at home, even if you're hanging off the side of a ledge. But that takes skill. Good monks. All right, guys. Well, we've been at this for quite a while. Does anybody have any last thoughts before we finish? All right. Excellent. Amrit, thank you for your question.
Thank you for a great answer, Dhammarato. And also thanks for the question. I think this Agnes question about this fear was also very, very useful for me. And
Good.
I will practice with it.
Excellent. All right, guys. We'll see you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for showing up. This has been marvelous.
Yeah, it was great. So many people.
Yes. And we'll see you later. Glad to have you. You know, I've been talking a lot about Goenka this talk. She's an old Goenka hen.
Yes, nice to see you too. Nice to hang out.
All right. Well, bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye.